Anita Nielsen is the president of LDK Advisory Services and the author of Beat the Bots: How Your Humanity Can Future-Proof Your Tech Sales Career. As a sales enablement consultant and performance coach, Anita provides sales leaders with proven sales optimization solutions that catalyze growth. Anita believes that asking questions to better understand your customer is the single most important skill separating average sales reps from high performers. High impact questions, or HIQs, as Anita calls them, draw out your prospect's rational buying criteria and uncover the powerful emotions that truly drive their buying decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to get a crash course in the art of the discovery question. It's my honor to welcome to the Boundless stage, Anita Nielsen. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today. Thanks, everyone, first off, for joining. I've been promoting a lot over the past couple of weeks because I really wanted to get as many people as I could to see this today. So a little bit about me, I'll let you read it. But the most important thing that you need to know is that I've been doing this for 20 plus years. And I always say, don't do the math in your head. And I'm a mom of 2 teenagers. I don't tell you that to feel sorry for me, except I do tell you that to feel sorry for me. Let's do this. All right, so first things first, the diamond rule. I like to start most of my presentations off with this because it's so important that as sales professionals, sales leaders, we all have this important idea in mind. So it goes like this. I can tell you I work with CEOs, SVPs of sales, CROs, CMOs, so sales leadership essentially. And inevitably, when I go in to do my discovery, one of the things that always comes up is this idea that my salespeople don't know how to articulate value, or my salespeople don't know how to identify value, et cetera, et cetera. So it always comes up to that conversation. What I like to do then is I like to just take a look at them, at the person I'm speaking with, and say, well, what does value mean? Now, first, they look at me like I'm bananas, which that's good. The sooner they find that out, the better. But second, they put together some mishmash definition of value. I can tell you in all the years, it's never been the same. And there's a reason for that. The idea of value has become, I think, so big that it almost doesn't mean anything to anybody anymore. And so that is something that I think we need to really think about as sales professionals. The only value that matters is the value that that customer perceives. So hence, the value is in the eye of the customer. It doesn't matter what your company's webpage says, it should be valuable to the customer. It doesn't matter what your product content says should be valuable to the customer. The only thing that matters is what that customer, the buyer, and that human feel is important at that moment, and it has value for them. So that's my baseline. I want to just make sure I say that to everyone because it kind of carries through just about everything that I talk about. All right, so now I'd like to talk about the evolution of B2B sales. It's changed a lot over the past several years. And I hope that's my only Captain Obvious statement, but I'm not going to promise that. We've seen tons of change, gosh, in, I would say, probably even just the past 3 to 5 years. So I'll take a step back, though. Let's think back maybe 50, 60 years to a used car lot where we meet our friend Leisure Suit Larry, the used car salesman. I know you guys all probably got a visual in your head of this guy with a coat and a shining necklace and just buttons open and all that. So yeah, that's exactly who I want you to see in your head. Leisure Suit Larry is a salesman for used cars. People who go in to visit with him and understand and learn about the cars and choose to buy a car, they go in, they talk to him. Larry knows everything that there is to know about those automobiles that are on the lot. He knows the features, he knows which ones are lemons, he knows which ones are actually pretty good. But the buyer comes in there and they don't really know much of anything. They may have an idea about the type of car that they're looking for because of word of mouth, somebody told them, or they may have some ideas of the color, anything like that, the basics, but they don't have any detailed information, the kind of information that actually makes a big difference when you're trying to make a purchase. And so what this does is, if you think about knowledge as power, which we do in this context, between a buyer and seller, the person that has more information and more knowledge, that's the person who owns the power in that conversation. And in those days with Larry, incredibly, it was with him every single time because he knew things that they didn't know. Now, unfortunately for all of us today, Larry did bad things with his powers. He manipulated and he was dishonest. And that we're still living that legacy, I think, today, even though we have come such a long way. That was the idea that there's information asymmetry. And something Daniel Pink said years ago, and it just meant so much to me to know that when you've got an imbalance between knowledge, it's asymmetrical, and you've got to do something about it as a salesperson. Regardless of which side that value falls on, you have to do something as a salesperson. So flash forward to today. If you want to go buy a car, by the time you get to that dealership, you know everything there is to know about that car. You may know the features, the benefits. You may have been on chat rooms or in forums where people who own that car are and ask them questions about how often they have to go in and maintain it. You have a ton of information. So by the time you go to that lot now, you know probably more than that sales professional because they don't necessarily know all the competitors' information that you've seen. You know the price of any given car in the 50-mile radius, that the car that you want to buy. And so now so it's a shift, right? Now it's the buyer that has the power. The buyer has more knowledge and more information than the seller. And so in this situation, the seller has to act differently. The seller can't do anything to manipulate or to be dishonest or lack integrity. They've got to tell it like it is, and they have to know what is out there so that they can be ready for any questions the buyer has. And I promise you, the buyer's always going to have questions because of the research that they've done. So that's happening very recently. Now, the one thing I will say, though, is actually very recently, it's changed again, yet again. And we still think knowledge is power, except do we? Right? Because what's happened now is in the past few years, the companies, B2B companies that are selling their products and such, they've gotten really clever. They figured out that their success is largely impacted by the type of content that they put out there, right? In terms of credibility, because buyers are doing a great amount of research before they even get to the sales rep for any given company. And so there's been an insane proliferation of good content, powerful content. So now it's almost like it's a little bit information overload. Let's see what Gartner has to say about it. The information that is out there now that companies are working really hard to put together. If you look at the study that Gartner did, they found that 55%, so over half of the people that are out there doing this research, they find an overwhelming amount of information that's good, it's trustworthy, right? Which you would think, based on what I just told you about knowledge being power, that that's great, that's wonderful, that's what they want to have. Yes and no, because almost half of the people that are making a purchase, they struggle. They don't know what to do with all this information, especially when they've got information from two different companies that they're trying to buy from, and it's contradictory. So they don't even know which one to believe. So this is our new challenge that we face as sales professionals. So if you look at I just wanted to circle these words for you just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. Look at these words: overwhelming, struggle, seemingly trustworthy, and contradictory. These are all scary words, right? So as a buyer, you are afraid of making a purchase because of all these unknowns and not being able to say which one is right and which one isn't. So what ends up happening, one of two things will happen. The buyer, when they're overwhelmed with information, either one, they will skip out on the sale altogether and they will choose the do nothing option. Or two, they will be so overwhelmed and in analysis paralysis mode that they will delay your sales cycle like huge every single time that you meet with them. They will push and push and push until they ultimately have to make a decision, which they may or may not. They may still go with do not change, right? This is a challenge because it's change. So we look at, oops, here we go. So literally today we've got customers that have too much information. So again, these customers have too much information. It's contradictory. They're overwhelmed. It's scary, all these things. So as sales professionals, knowing that we have to react according to where our customer's at, what do we do when it's literally too much information? Well, we take a step back, and I can tell you the sales professionals that are always trying to stay ahead and make sure that they are doing for their customers before their customers even really think about what they need. Those people, they've figured out that there is something that they can do to help their customers in this situation in particular, and that is contextualize. So salespeople now, they can look at that information with their customer. They can curate information for their customer. They can condense it and clarify it and do all these things that help that customer get better quality information that'll actually help enable them to make the buying decision, right? So it takes a little bit of overwhelm out. And so any salesperson that is out there that is able to do that, that becomes a really valuable resource to that customer because they're taking the fear and the scariness and that risk out of that buying process. So you have to stay on you stay up to date on what is out there, and then you help provide your customer with the information that will help them move forward and get them out of that analysis paralysis mode. All right, so the trick about the contextualizing, though, is if you want to be able to do things in context, you got to know that context. And of course, you guys know there's only one way to do that, right? And that is being a master of discovery. And do a discovery that's so powerful that you will have a full idea of the context of that customer by the time you go and try to contextualize your information, other sources of information, etc. So how do we do that? Well, there's a thing called high impact questions. I found that every salesperson worth their salt has been trained very early on in their career that you have to ask open-ended questions. You cannot ask closed-ended questions. You don't want yes or no answers. Do they listen? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But it's known. Like, we all know we're supposed to ask open-ended questions. But here's the thing. Sometimes those aren't even enough. And so we've got this idea of a high impact question, which is pretty much an open-ended question on steroids, because it probes even further. So it almost takes you to like the next layer of information. It allows you to get much more information from that customer. Again, remember, our goal is to be able to contextualize. Can't do that unless we totally understand the context. Here's the winning play with this type of question. The emotions seep in. We all heard, and it's proven, that people buy on emotion and then they use their logic and reason later on to justify that purchase. So as sales professionals, we have to be cognizant of those emotions that are going on and work our approach accordingly. These questions give you some insight into that emotion, as opposed to, just the regular old questions that you have. The last one, I only say this half jokingly, these questions do even make a shrink jealous. And I know this because my best friend is a psychiatrist, and she liked a couple of the ones that I shared with her. Here's the deal. People in psychology, psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, those individuals, their life is built on this idea that they have to understand their customers or their clients' emotions, right? And they are trained to draw those emotions out in their conversations, and they do a good job of it. That's the only way to help those clients. We, as sales professionals, in some way, we need to draw the emotions out and the insight out from that customer so that we can help them make the buying decision. So there's a parallel there. All right, so we're going to zip through a few different open-ended questions. So you can get, open-ended and high-impact questions, so you can kind of see the difference, okay? So we'll start with this one. Who reports to you, right? Or who do you report to? Yes, people do go in and ask questions just like this, I promise you. So that is a basic question. It's good. You need the information. You need to know who their leader is. You need to know who their team is. Great, good question. But what can we do to make it better? You can say something like, what is your organizational structure? Or what does your organizational structure look like? And you're curious, right? So you want to know this. So what's the difference? I'll give you an example. As an embedded coach, I have the pleasure of being able to go out on ride-alongs with the sales reps and actually see them in action. It's more Zoom-alongs now, but you get the picture. I was working with one of my coaching clients, and it was a company that sells technology services. So we are typically selling to SVPs of IT or CIOs, et cetera. We go in, and the sales professional, my client, had been trained ad nauseum by me to ask this question and not the other. And so he does. He goes in and asks the SVP of sales the SVP of IT this question: what's your organizational structure? And the gentleman thinks about it for a second, and he goes into this story about how we have a new CIO. He's only been here for 3 months. He's brought along some people with him from his previous company, and they've all worked together for many years. So I can tell you the org chart, but I don't know how long it's going to stick. I mean, there's only me and my friend Larry in applications, and we don't know where we're going to land. Pause. There's a lot more that he said, but for the purposes of time, that's what I will tell you. So what you got from that question is so much bigger and so much more than you would have from the one on the other question, the common question. And the trick is the emotions are in there. So you can tell, you don't have to be a psychologist to tell, but there's some anxiety and some stress going on with this individual because of the changes that are happening. They're basically an unknown to their new leader, and the people that are their peers now, they already have a built-in relationship. This is not a fun place to be in as an employee, as a buyer. And so you put this, as a good salesperson, you put this in your back pocket. And what do? So you go through the sales process, you go to a presentation, and as you're doing the presentation, the SVP of IT is they're loving it. They think it's really good. They think there's a good value, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of it, you say to that prospect and customer, you say, you know what? I know that you're still trying to build your credibility with that CIO. I make slides like this all the time. How about if I take a stab and make a deck for you so that you can go present that to your CIO and kind of show them how much thought you've given to this? And this is a pretty powerful thing. And I can promise you from that moment, that SVP of IT they looked at that salesperson differently. They didn't look at him as necessarily a salesperson. And that image of the old leisure suit Larry was gone. At this point, he looked at that person as someone who had their back. And that's a whole different level. And that's where you want to be as a sales professional. All right, so I'm going to zip through these. This one is about budget. Oops. Oh, where'd it go? Okay, here we go. So the budget process. Everyone asks about budget. We know we have to. Well, why don't we ask it this way? How do you determine which projects get funded? Pretty cool, because now you're going to understand not just kind of their budget, but you're going to understand the thought process behind how they budget, the priority with which they budget. That's really important information for you to know so that you can figure out how to show that your product or solution that you're selling fits with that thought process. So you get a lot more in there. If you want to know about what they do, well, what's your role here at Acme Corp? Pretty simple question. How about if we ask them, tell me about your plight here at Alpha Corp? All right, so this one I'll tell you real quick. This one is my favorite right now, and it's one of the ones I've been excited to tell you about because I've been doing some in-field research on this and having sales reps use this. And what I found is that at first, when you ask this question, the customer kind of looks at you like, confused. And it's because no one asks this question, right? No one actually goes in and asks a customer to tell them about their plight. And not clarifying, by the way, whether it's their plight as a buyer, their plight as a human, their plight as whatever that role is. And so by asking this question, you've opened it up so wide. And not only will you learn more than you would have with an average question, but emotions will probably seep in, because when someone is telling you about their plight, they're going to share what they're feeling and what they're sensing along the way. And again, that's gold, right? The emotion is what you're after. And so after they've kind of gotten over that initial shock, they just open up and they just go and they go and they go. And you ask your follow-up questions in there and you get the information that you need. But people love to talk about themselves, but more than that, they love to feel heard. And so in this exchange, you really do walk away having more credibility and more trust with that customer. So I want you to try that one. That one's been really, really good. There's a couple of times where customers have come back and said, what do you mean? What do you mean plight? And I coach the salespeople for when that happens to say, you know what, I'm being vague on purpose. I don't want to tell you what to tell me. What matters to me is what you need at this point. So just go anywhere with it. Tell me your plight. And at that point, then they're kind of like, okay, well, this person is really asking this and I'm going to answer it. And so even that initial shock that they have, it kind of dissipates and they end up coming into that conversation with much more than they were maybe initially prepared to do. All right, what keeps you up at night? Hate this question. I hate this question. Everybody tries to ask it. Maybe many years ago, somebody taught it, and after 3 million people learned the same question, customers have gotten savvy to this. And now you'll get answers like, my new puppy, my newborn, etc. Things that have nothing to do with the business because they expect this type of question. So let's turn that around. Let's say something like, what do you think will be the most valuable part of implementing or buying whatever your product is? Insert product there. It's very different, right? In the one that's common, you're asking what their challenges are, what's the struggle. In this one, you're kind of flipping it on its head. Now you're asking what's valuable to them, which once you do that, you kind of figure out what is their challenge, because they're going to tell you what's valuable based on the things that they don't necessarily have right now. And you can clarify that along the way. But they're going to tell you pretty much everything that they're looking for. And God help me if you're not taking copious notes at this point, because this is how you're actually going to create your value proposition, by getting information like this. All right, what business outcome are you looking to achieve? This one's pretty common, and actually a lot of people in consultative or value selling, as they call it, ask this question. Nothing wrong with it. However, I'd rather ask this question to that buyer. Help me understand where the rubber hits the road for you with this buying decision. And first off, again, these are questions that are going to make your customer kind of look at you, because they don't hear these. These are not questions that have been necessarily posed to them on a regular basis. And so right away, they get the sense, if you ask these, that you genuinely care about hearing what is valuable to them. Rubber hits the road basically means for you as a buyer in this scenario, what does it mean to either buy this or not buy this, or buy this from us or somewhere else? And you just let them go with it and they will tell you, right? And that's, again, that goes back to the value that you want to be able to show later. All right, so that was the last of the questions. And I will, if you'd like, I'll send you an ebook later. We'll have a little message that'll show you how to do that to get some more discovery questions, some more high impact questions. But at the end of the day, what you want to be able to do is you want to use these types of initial comments in your questions, right? So start your questions with these things, right? How do you think? Tell me about. How would you? Why was it done that way? Can you describe, etc.? You get the point. These types of questions turn anything into a high impact question. The only thing is, don't use how do you feel. That's kind of shrink humor. It'll come off as creepy, so don't use that one. But the other ones are fair game. Okay, so now that you've got the answers, you've asked these big, mega open-ended questions, you've learned about emotion, you've gotten some answers. Now is where your turn comes in to make a big difference and differentiate yourself. How are you going to take the information that that customer has in their head? How are you going to take the answers that they've just gave you? How are you going to take the emotions that they've let you kind of into? And put that all together in a way that shows them that the product that you're selling matters to them in their context. It is going to create the value that they have shared with you exists for them in that buying decision. And you got to put those things together. And really what you're doing is you're helping them make sense of all the crazy, all the noise, all the things that are going on around them. You're de-risking, you're making it less scary. So what you're doing so much in this situation isn't selling or convincing. It's helping them buy. And that's a very different thing. People respond much better to sales professionals who are kind of helping them walk through the process instead of trying to push them through the process. Okay. So that's basically the main thing that I wanted to share with you today is ask your questions, get all the information, and put it in context for them. Values in the eye of the customer. Everything you do and say has to go back to what their perception of value is. Not what's in your pitch deck, not what you've been told in training classes by product people. It is what matters to them. And if you ask the right questions, you're going to get there. So just wanted to pop up a couple of takeaways for you so that you can remember when you go back. And I hope, starting next week, I hope you're going to ask some of these and see how it goes. I always love it when people ask these questions and immediately they get a big change, a big difference than usual. And then it becomes habit, right? Because you get reinforced when you're doing it. So we talked about the buyer having power versus the seller having power, excuse me. We talked about too much information and how that can lead to either not doing anything or analysis paralysis, neither of which is good for you as a sales professional. The difference between an average salesperson and the elite or the modern sales professional is that they know how to do things like clarify, simplify, condense, and ultimately contextualize whatever it is that that customer needs to know or they need to buy into the real world for that customer. Kind of joke about it, but it's like you have to figure out how to show them that what you're selling belongs in their habitat. Right? That's what you have to do with this. And those questions are the fastest way to get you there. Discovery, that's how you figure out what's what. And if you can't get through that discovery without digging deep, you actually will probably not be able to do a good job of articulating value. And I think that's where a lot of the issues that sales leaders that I speak with come from. If their people are not articulating value, regardless of what the definition is at that point, it's probably because there's a gap in discovery and how they're asking questions. And so that's what we end up addressing. And so high impact questions, most powerful, they let the emotions seep in. And I guess my question to you is, first, homework, go use some of these questions and see how it goes. Find me, send me an email, find me on LinkedIn and tell me what you thought. And then next, ask yourself, is this question going to make a shrink jealous? And you'll have fun with it. I think you'll have fun with asking these types of questions and seeing how your customers respond and how their perception of you changes because you do. Right, so that is all I had to share with you today, but I think we're going to do some questions.
Hey, Anita, thank you so much. Yeah, from all of us, that was so insightful. I really applaud the call to engage with prospects and customers and really like a more genuine way. It does take work. And before we get to our audience questions, if anyone in the audience does have any questions for Anita, now is your chance. But before we move into that, I'm just curious, similar to the role of a shrink or a therapist, that's hard. That's labor. That's work. What do you do on a tough day where you really need to bounce back? The theme of this year's conference is really about resilience. And
Yes.
I applaud the call to engage more genuinely, but
Yeah,
it can be tiring. What do you do
it
after
is.
a hard?
And I love this question. I love it because it is a challenge. I mean, I'll go home sometimes and I'm exhausted, having taken on all these challenges and issues from other people and kind of absorbed them. And what I do is there's a few different things. I think mindfulness is really, really important, right? So unplug, don't be focusing on work. Give yourself some time to recoup and show yourself that you're grateful for all the things that you've done and that you're lucky enough to be in a position where people will share these things with you and you have an ability to make an impact. And that's actually how we're going to change sales as a profession. So you have to take care of you in order to take care of your customer. So make time for that. But at the end of the day, recognize you're not Larry. You are people that are going to help make things happen for these customers and probably turn them into customers for life.
Yeah. Just some great tips. Wonderful. Oh, I see on your slides here, you do have a book on Amazon. Can you tell us, the audience, a little bit more about this that we see on the screen?
Yes, yeah, it's called Beat the Bots, and essentially the theme is that in order for you as human beings, as sellers, to be successful in the future, you have to do the things that robots can't do. Because I can tell you, if a robot is able to do something in the sales process, they'll get to do it. Somebody will buy a robot to do it. But there's some things that robots just can't do, like empathy, genuinely caring, and as you were saying, relating to your customer. As long as those things aren't duplicated by robots, we have a chance. And in fact, those are the things that we should be focusing on. And of course, discovery is a big part of that, right? Discovery, active listening, et cetera. And so that's what the book talks about in great detail.
That's awesome. Yeah, definitely adding that to my reading list. That's really wonderful. All right, a couple more questions for you, Anita, if we have a little bit of time. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so as we work to ask more of these HIQ questions, right, you provided some really, really great examples in your talk. What are some tips? Because, if I'm sitting in the audience, and I'm sure there are a lot of people in our audience right now thinking, great, yes, this sounds, you make it sound so easy. But when we pick up the phone, right, Monday morning, we're feeling those challenges again and again. What are some tips for our audience just on adopting this new style of engagement?
Good question. Thank you for that. I think, and you're doing exactly what I just taught you to do. Like, I've got to contextualize this for you. So basically, what you're going to do is take baby steps. There's no law that says that you have to now go in and go ask all these questions. In fact, you'll probably look like a creep if you do that for one customer all at once. So give yourself, pick one that you really like, okay, and then start using that in the context of your customers. You'll see the result you get, and then you'll be ready to do a second one. And before you know it, these are just going to be natural for you because you will have learned that this is where the money lives.
Yeah.
And so trust in the process of learning, and that if you take the steps to actually get that insight and that knowledge, it'll become intuitive. So I think it's going to be hard at first because it's awkward. It's not something you've done before, but take the leap, do it. And over time, you'll find that that's really the only way to go going forward.
For sure. Okay, great tips. Thank you so much. And then one more from my question list, and then we've got a couple from the audience. But you used so many great euphemisms in some of these HIQ questions, which speaks to my heart. Right? I don't say like "thanks for giving me a compliment." It's like "thanks for pumping my tires." I love them so much. What is your favorite euphemism on a sales call to use?
Gosh, well, so I mean, it depends on what it is. So if we're talking about like maybe an idiom, it would be rubber hits the road. I love that. I love the plight. I think that's that's probably my favorite right now because when I ask that question about tell me about your plight, I'm not saying tell me about your role or your job. It is a euphemism. It's making it's elevating it. And so that's my favorite by far right now. And I'm loving how much customers open up with that. And all of a sudden you are kind of being their therapist, which by the way is an irreplaceable place to be.
Of course. Definitely. Yeah, that's a really good one. Okay. Well, we did have a question about that plight word. Somebody's intrigued and said, what exactly do you mean? Which is, kind of the point, right?
That's exactly right. What I mean is what it means to them. And so when you ask someone their plight, they have to do that exercise of translating in their mind, what is this person asking me? And what's going to happen is they're going to go where they need to go. They're going to go where their challenges are and where their problems are. And you're going to get a lot more than what is your role here. Yeah. And so, like I said, there in this experiment that I've been doing for a few months now, there are a couple of customers that'll just look at you and say, what do you mean? And the answer to that is, I'm being vague on purpose.
Yeah,
I want to hear from you. I could sit here and ask you all kinds of questions, but that doesn't matter as much as what you want to talk about. So have at it. Customers
for
get so taken aback by this because no one does it. They have no option but to just start giving it all to you because they're not used to salespeople actually caring at that
Right.
level.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Yeah, I think that provided some good clarification. We've got some more great questions here. Let's see here. Okay. So for high impact questions or high Q questions, high impact questions, what exactly, sorry, I'm so sorry. Norm, we asked your question twice.
You're good. You're good.
You wanted to say, in other words, when the client responds with that question, what do you say? But I guess we already kind of covered that. Thank you, Ashanti, for taking that one off. So he also asked, sometimes a good question makes people ramble with the stream of consciousness. Absolutely. Getting completely off topic, potentially losing focus from the purpose of the call. Do you have any tips for gracefully getting that conversation back on track?
I do. And I'm so divided on this question because part of me wants to say, let them ramble, right? Because what they're going to share with you is going to be valuable. However, you'll be able to sense when they're just like going on with nothing that's useful to you, which I think that's not always going to happen. But what you do is, you just pause them and say, okay, I have a question. Ask them a question and ask a question that brings them back to what your plan was on what you needed to learn. Right.
Yeah.
So ask them one of the questions that makes them talk about the current org structure or the current process, et cetera, and pause them. And they'll recognize when you ask that question that they were rambling. People know that. And so that's how they'll gracefully move on to the next topic, and you'll just have nudged them in a way that is not rude, not mean, just curious.
For sure. Yeah, still allowing them to talk about themselves and lead the conversation or feel in that position of power. I think that's a really great tip.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got a question from Mike. He says, what's wrong with asking, how do you feel about, is it just better to ask, what does X mean to you? I guess, could you talk a little bit about
That's a great question. I love that question. I actually do often ask, how do you feel? Right. But I've got this background in psychology, so I'm a little bit prepared depending on what they're going to say. So I say, don't ask it. You don't want necessarily the answers that you're going to get. But if it's in the context of how do you feel about this process, of course, ask the question. You want to know what that answer is. You want to know what their perception is. Back to the diamond rule, like value is what it is to them. And so by asking how you feel about something, you're doing a great thing because not only you're looking at just the value, but you're asking for the emotion around what you're asking about. So you absolutely can do that. I think there's something to be said about instinct, right? A good salesperson's instinct. Trust it. I think a lot of times I find salespeople that question their instinct and then they end up doing something silly when they initially would have done something right. So trust your instinct. You'll get a feel for if that customer is one you want to just kind of look at and nod your forward and say, well, how do you feel about that? Or somebody that you want to just say, help me understand what this means to you, right? So you'll be able to, I trust that you'll be able to tell.
Yeah. Great answer. Thank you so much. All right. We've got another question from James. James has great content. Thank you. Most people are so focused on an agenda of asking the tough questions instead of actively listening and building connection. What are some tips you have?
Yes. So active listening. So when I actually train this content and I've got a lot of time to do it, I talk about research and I talk about high impact questions. And I talk about active listening. Active listening is so important. Here's the thing. We are living in a world where people in the same house, and I may or may not know somebody who does this, are texting from downstairs to their teenagers upstairs. This is a world where connection is not happening the way it used to, and this COVID has added a whole nother dimension to it. So when you actively listen to somebody, that is so they get almost taken aback because no one makes the time to listen anymore.
Yeah.
So the active listening is really where everything comes together. When you give that person the opportunity to speak and actually listen to them, they will feel a difference. There'll actually almost be a chemical difference in what's going on there. Now, the other thing to know is a lot of times when you ask a question and they start talking about it, it's almost as if, like somebody said before, you want to kind of take control of it, but let them go, let them do it, let them talk in that way, and that'll get you where you need to go.
Great answer. Yeah, I love that. So we've got a question from Ian. He says, Why is your logo an elephant?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. So there's a few different things that make it an elephant. I love that you asked that question. So I'm Indian. I was born in India, and elephant is a very lucky symbol there, as it is in other cultures. So that's one thing. There is a god called Ganesh in Indian and Hindu religion that is the remover of all obstacles. So that's pretty cool. And then there's some content that I actually share when I train my classes that has to do with an elephant, and so it's a no-brainer to make the elephant the logo. But thank you for asking.
Yeah, absolutely. I love getting questions like that.
That's a nice. That was nice. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thoughtful question.
Anything else about your brand that the audience should know about that you haven't already shared?
Yeah. Well, so for the elephant, there's like 5 little springs of water that are coming out of out of his trunk. And I was born, like I said, in India in Punjab, which means 5 rivers. And so that's kind of what that was supposed to represent. So the logo is it's a very personal logo to me. And it took a lot of thought into it. So that's why I'm so glad somebody asked about it. No, I just want to say to everyone who listened today, thank you. I'm really glad that you're here. It heartens me to see that people come in and listen to this type of content and join these types of events, because it reminds me that you guys do want to adapt and you do want to grow and you want to face the future and things that are changing. So kudos to you. Keep doing that. Don't let anybody take your curiosity away from you. And sometimes things get to be a drag, and that can happen. But hang on to that, and you will be great for a very long time.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, that's been one of my favorite questions to ask. And, we've had we have such wonderful speakers this year, but one of my favorite questions to ask our speakers this year is, what kind of advice would you offer our audience today? That we're all kind of looking towards this next year with a sense of, hope. What would you like to say to our audience as they kind of take on this new year?
Yeah, hang on to the hope, right? Know that things will change. Either sooner or later, things are going to change and they are going to get better. But you do have control over certain things still. And don't lose sight of that. Don't let all the things that you don't have control over overwhelm the things that you do have control and influence over. So try to manage your focus and your mindset on, how can I make a difference despite all this crazy going on? And I think you'll find that as you do that, you almost feel yourself growing, right? Because you're not letting anything else get you down. So I think that's the way to look at it. And I wrote this article about hope because, to me, as a sales professional, if you can get in there and talk to your customers and create hope for them in this moment, you differentiate, because they're starved for hope. I like to say there's an infinite market for hope right now. So be the person that can go in there and help share that hope and show them that things are going to get better. And by the way, this is what your life is going to look like with my product.
Yeah, there you go. Bringing it home. I love that. Well, we're running a little short on time. If there are any last minute questions, now is our chance with Anita.
One more thing I wanted to just say real quick, and I should do this disclaimer. So you have to have good intent. None of these things work if you go in there trying to think like Larry. Just stop selling. You're giving us a bad name. Go in with good intent. Understand that you are there to help that customer succeed, and everything that comes out of your mouth will make sure that they understand that. But you have to have that mindset. Mindset dictates behavior. It dictates your words. Know that you are there to help them, not to sell them. Mm-hmm. You'll get where you need to get if you go with that good intent.
I actually have one follow-up question for you. I'm asking it because I know this question is out there in the audience right now. What do you do to bounce back after a call does not go as you would have hoped? Like, what do you do in those couple seconds to amp yourself back up and come back into that next call with good intent? Because that can really wear on us over time as we're pounding the phones day after day. Like, what would you recommend?
So this is a thought process, right? So if I get off a call that just did not go well, I have a choice. I can either blame it on everything possible, right, and let it continue to get me down, or I can sit down and say, okay, well, that didn't work. What could I have done better? And look at that. And then really do something about it, right? But here's the thing. When that happens, it's going to suck. You're not going to feel good about it. But that doesn't mean that you give up on all the things that are ahead. So now I'm going to want more to do better on the next one. I'm going to figure out what made that one not go well. And so that's how you have to approach it. Like, this isn't something that's going to drag me down. It's going to help me figure out how to be better in the future. And I know that sounds kind of like, cliche, but it's actually true, right? You have to look at things as an opportunity to grow.
Yeah, most definitely. Okay. Thank you. Last question for you. What is your vision for LDK over the next year? Like, what have you got planned for yourselves?
That's a good question. So I am actually making a little bit of a shift in the business this year. So historically, I've done all kinds of sales enablement type efforts. So I'd go in there and I kind of became this fixer for sales leaders, and not the Ray Donovan kind, a good one. And basically, by doing that, I've just scattered kind of my focus, and so I'm not spending as much time on the things that I genuinely love to do, which is my training courses. And so I built this 2-day training class. It's called Psych to Sell, and essentially it combines all the basics of consultative type selling and value selling. So questions, research, all that, but then it adds a layer of psychology and how you leverage psychology to really make your customer value you as a sales professional. And so it's 2-day class. It's awesome. And I've already started to kind of build that up. And I'm just so excited. I love it. I love being in that classroom and watching y'all learn. So hopefully that's the direction that this is going to go, more of that and less of the other.
Sure. Awesome. Well, we're so excited for you. Definitely. Just thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all.
Absolute pleasure. From all of us on the Boundless team, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Boundless.
Really appreciate you. For those of you watching, please stay tuned for a very special talk featuring Nutshell CEO Andy Fowler, where he'll be discussing what we've been up to over the past year and the next stage of Nutshell's evolution. I'll be back with you at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific for Supercharging Your Growth by Mastering Customer Retention, featuring Mark Stoddard of Client Success. Take care, everyone. Thank you, Anita.